So today's episode is going to be a little bit different than most because we are having a community conversation about what it means to be sober curious. So today you're going to hear a conversation with me and Jody Sidel, who is the owner of a non-alcoholic shop in Richmond, as well as clips that community members sent in about their relationship with substance over time. These conversations have informed my relationship with substances so much, so I am really excited to share this episode with you. And after this episode, if you want to continue exploring what it means to be sober curious and want to try having a new relationship with substances, there is a link to a PDF in the show notes that is full of tips and guided reflection questions to help you explore your relationship with substance and to support you in having a new relationship with it. I also want to note that we do talk about substance abuse in this episode, so if conversations around that are triggering for you, go ahead and skip this episode. Okay, I can't wait any longer. Let's dive into the conversation. I met Jody when I walked into Point Five. I think the first time I had ever heard of the shop was when someone, a friend brought over a non-alcoholic wine to dinner. And I just thought that was so cool. And the wine tasted great. And it was kind of like nice to have something to sip on. And she was raving about your shop. And then Will and I, my husband, came in and just have been really enjoying, getting different things from there.
Thank you. I love that. I love hearing that. And I apologize. That might be my dog in the background. I don't know if that's going to be okay.
My dog Luna likes to bark in the background too.
Oh my gosh. As soon as you said hello, it's like that's when he decided to start barking.
It's all good.
Anyway, yeah, we will. Firstly, thank you for coming in the shop. And I love hearing that somebody takes a bottle of wine or takes something to an event and people go, oh, wow, let me try this. And then it just opens up. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious about what your relationship with substance has been like throughout your life and I guess what it's like now.
Yeah. So, I grew up in England. And back in the 80s, there wasn't really a whole lot of, if you could, reach the bar, then you could get served. So I started probably having drinks at about 14 with friends, and that just sort of continued. It was such a big part of our life and what we did. Everything involved, going to the pub, going to or eating out and having drinks, going to parties. So I started pretty young. Didn't think about it, didn't drink any more than anyone else or any less than people, just seemed quite normal. And then fast forward, so it really was a big part of my life. And then fast forward, I started working in restaurants and bars. Felt like I was getting more, my tastes had changed. And I started to, love very good red wines and bourbons and things like that. And so as I got older, that sort of changed and became more of a, cocktail hour and having drinks with friends. And I definitely questioned many times that potentially I was drinking too much. I did get a DUI in 2017. And it definitely, I went through a divorce in 2015 and things sort of spiraled for a few years. And then I guess during pandemic, from then I stopped, but I didn't stop completely, but I started being more sober curious. So that phrase that, is so well known now probably started back, right around when that happened in 2017. And I would go back and forth and back and forth. During the pandemic, I really decided I wanted to not drink as much because I knew that it could go either way during that time. And, for a lot of people, it did. A lot of people increased their drinking during the pandemic. People were drinking earlier. They were drinking on Zoom calls, So I started ordering a lot of things online that I could find so that I had options at home rather than, if I didn't have anything. I love water, but I wanted something that defined the end of the day. and water wasn't really cutting it. I don't drink soda. And so, I wanted something to sort of find that replacement. And that's where everything began. Started ordering things in 2020. Then I got very busy in real estate. So I did think about opening a shop back in those days, back in 2020. Got very busy in real estate and sort of put it on the back burner. But I wasn't drinking very much at all for those few years. And then in 2022, I signed the lease for the shop and I stopped drinking completely 11 months ago. So it'd been sort of a wind down, wind down, wind down for 3 years, where maybe I was, I don't know, having drinks maybe 15 times a year,
Mm-hmm.
to just stopping completely. And but it's something, I actually found a diary which I think is so interesting from when I was 27, and I'd actually questioned my drinking back then. So clearly it was something that had been, you know, in my mind for a very long time, that I definitely did not always have a switch off. I definitely, wanted to be the life and soul of the party. I wanted to hang with the guys. I, was proud of the fact that I could really handle my drink and, and all those
Mm-hmm.
things. Um, so for me, it was definitely, I relied on alcohol for every situation, be it celebratory, commiserating, happy days, sad days, great week at work, bad week at work. It didn't matter what it was. There was always a reason for me to, to buy some wine or to buy some drinks or something.
Yeah, I think, well, first, what you're saying about how you questioned your relationship with drinking like a lot throughout your life, which I think is really common. And we haven't had a really language or space to talk about it, which is why I find the term sober curious so interesting. Um, I had never
Mm-hmm.
heard it before until probably like maybe 6 months ago.
Right.
And I'm curious, what does sober curious mean? What's your interpretation of that?
My interpretation is simply the curiosity around what's it like to have an alternative? What's it like to try having a non alcoholic beverage at the end of the day? What's it like to go out for dinner and instead of having, what you normally drink, to try something else? So just curious about, I think it's more of a lifestyle, curious about how your lifestyle is going to change if you decide to, either be cutting out drinking altogether or just be more mindful about it. So sober curious, mindful drinking, it's all sort of to me the same idea. Just sort of, we don't think about it very often, especially people that, like me, tend to be all or nothing people. For the longest time, it was either you drink or you don't drink, and nobody wanted to say, well, I do, but I'm really questioning it, or I do, but I don't think I should, but I don't really know what to do because it's been such a massive part of my life, and all my friends drink and all my colleagues drink, and so it's that curiosity of how will it affect my life a lot, how will it affect my life, and then looking at that, and that's how I interpret it. I don't think there's a right or a wrong, but there could be, I don't know, and I could be wrong, but that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, I feel really similarly with that. And I think maybe there just hasn't been, it's just been such a societal norm for so long. Like people used to have beer breaks at work instead of like a coffee break because that was how you could have like a clean beverage, because water wasn't
Mm-hmm.
purified then. It was like there were, so there's a long history of alcohol just being ever present and seen as this like, hey, this substance is okay. It's quite expected to be used. Whereas
Right.
other substances aren't, which I find really interesting. And it's really, well, a lot of what you were saying, I think, is really similar to what I relate to and what a lot of people sent in about there this being this culture around alcohol. And it's this societal norm. It's something that, that's how we engage socially with people. It's common in celebrations, like you were said, whether it's a happy thing or a sad thing, it's really common to have a drink there regardless of the occasion. A community member shared about their experience with alcohol and substances in different spaces.
Okay,
So this
great.
is from another organization in Richmond called Fallout, and they host something called a sobar party throughout the year during different times. So this is something I found really interesting.
Personally, I am not sober. However, I've been deeply touched by alcoholism in my family, and one of the biggest things that with my family member whose alcoholism eventually led to their death was that they kept on relapsing because they never felt like they could go out and have fun. So they would go to places that they wanted to go to and attempt to be sober, but because everyone else was drinking, they just ultimately relapsed, and they did that so many times, eventually they passed away. And that just always stuck with me, that they just never felt like they could go anywhere and have fun. And I thought, if anything, if this helps people get used to being in a space that would normally have alcohol, but soberly, that maybe eventually they could be here when there was alcohol and not have the awkwardness, and be able to go enjoy the things that adults enjoy, but without having the presence of alcohol there. Because we are kind of attached to that crutch of alcohol as a social lubricant in our nightlife spaces. And, people don't really know how to have fun lots of times without alcohol. So this just kind of removes that temptation and allows people to just be in a nightlife space sober.
I found that response really powerful, sharing about like a loved one who, didn't make it because they had such a hard
Right.
time being in social spaces, and how that inspired something else. And, throughout high school and college, we would joke around and be like, oh, liquid courage to go into this situation. But I think it is a very real thing. We don't often have many opportunities, especially as young adults, like where we are engaging in spaces without a substance present. There's kind of always this veil to help us feel more comfortable when we're around other people.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of why, I started drinking at a young age. I was quite shy, actually. I mean, people will think of me as an extrovert, but that's mainly because I always had that liquid courage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. And then when I found that I could become this much more vivacious and outgoing and speak to everyone and lose all of my worries, then it becomes, once you see that and you do that, then you forget how to be without that. And that's the trouble. It becomes habit, because you think, oh, if I'm, as I got older, before I would go out or go on a date or something, I might have a glass of wine at home, before even going out, because again, just to kind of go, okay, well, I don't, first date or something, you don't know the
Mm-hmm.
person, hey, now I feel just a little bit more relaxed, and um, but you become so used to that you really forget how to be without it. And so, to the point of what the lady just said, it is you do feel incredibly uncomfortable when you stop and you still try and do the same things, because you feel like you stand out. It's definitely an internal thing. It's not, no one else is thinking that you stand out, but you feel it to yourself that you are, you stand out like a sore thumb, that you're going to be boring, that nobody's going to think you're funny anymore. And nobody, people will be like, oh my gosh, she's not drinking, it's going to be boring this evening, and you put
Mm-hmm.
all these things on yourself. um and for a lot of people, and for me, that kept me having alcohol in my life for another 25 years, from being 27 and writing that, which is crazy. um but then, for me, it was joining. I joined a community, an online community in 2020. And that's when I realized there were so many people like me all over the world, all trying to get a grip and figure out, some people that class themselves as an alcoholic, some people that class themselves as alcohol dependent, whatever the feeling what you want to put on yourself didn't matter. We were all struggling with the same thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to that one as well. Like, I think first of all, there is definitely this like interesting, I don't know quite the word for it, but there's like dependency and there's addiction. And they're different things, but I also think they live in a spectrum. And I think that
Yes.
on some level, most of us have some sort of dependency towards a substance, right? Whether
Right.
it's like coffee, even, or these other drugs that are, present in our world that we like turn to for different things.
Right.
And it's curious which ones are like okay to use and like societally normal and which ones are seen as not that. And it's also really curious from my perspective of like mindfulness, right? It's like often we turn to that substance when we don't know how to be with the discomfort of a
Yes.
situation, right? Yeah, like whether it's a first date, which like I know I have like taken a shot or had a glass of wine before going on a first date before. Or being in a social situation, whether it's I've so many times I've had a drink at a party or at dinners just because I was so uncomfortable with not like with having
Yeah.
people questioning like why isn't she drinking, like thinking that might be weird versus feeling confident enough in myself like I just it's not what my body wants.
Right. Right. And
Yeah,
that's absolutely another big part is how people project on you if you decide you're not drinking, how it affects other people around you, because people want to know why, and they question, and they just don't, they don't get it. Nobody questions you when you decide to stop smoking. Nobody says,
exactly.
why on earth would you do that? Like, it would be the most ridiculous thing for somebody to say. I can't imagine, oh my gosh, my life would be so different if I didn't smoke. It's silly things, or whatever substance that we could be using, to replace what the smoking I just said. No, there's no other thing that anyone does that gets those questions except for alcohol. That's the only
Exactly.
one where people question it, and they think there's something, they assume that you've hit rock bottom if you quit drinking, because why would anyone quit drinking if they hadn't hit rock bottom, and all these sort of things. And that's, I mean, it's just crazy. And so I have a family member who is an alcoholic, and she kept on, just like some of the comments that the other lady made for quite some time, because uh she didn't want to sound out. She didn't want to be that person. She didn't want to be questioned why.
Mm-hmm.
And it's yeah, when you think about it, it's really just mind-blowing that we put so much on drinking. I've heard people say, I don't trust somebody that doesn't drink. Or
Yeah, that's like
you
a
know
phrase.
yes, and it's so crazy when the more I think about it, and I worry that I might have been somebody that would have made that comment 20
Mm-hmm.
years ago. But yeah, and that's, I think I probably made comments like that because I probably felt uncomfortable with how much I was drinking,
Mm-hmm.
so we then put the reflection on somebody else.
Yeah, and it's almost this like undertone of societal peer pressure, but it's also just like expectancy. It's like,
Right.
yeah, you'll grow up and you'll have a glass of wine at dinner and when you're out with friends, and that will be normal. But that's not the same relationship that there is with any other substance. Just like you said, there's like no other substance that people ask you why you don't do it.
Yes.
Y-
Why you don't
Yeah.
do it. Yeah, nobody questions anything else the way they do alcohol. And that's just because we've been fed it from everything we see on television, movies, TV, magazines, everything we look at. It's drinking a sophisticated thing. It's a,
Mm-hmm.
people that are wealthier will have the wine lunches or the martini lunches, and they'll go to the country club and the golf. And, we put this, if you're in that position, then gosh, there's absolutely no problem with somebody drinking compared to somebody that's on the street that is drinking out of a brown paper bag. At the end of the day, the alcohol is the alcohol. It's just one is prettier than the other. So, but
Yes.
we are so tricked to see it in such a different capacity. And I do want to say, I'm not about people. I'm not knocking anyone that drinks, because I am an all or nothing person. For me, moderation, it doesn't work. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that I don't think anyone should drink, or I'm going to
Yeah.
say drinking is terrible. Yeah, that's not ever where I'm coming from. I just think these conversations, people are starting to realize that we're so tricked to believe it's what we need,
Mm-hmm.
when so many times it's the complete opposite of what we need.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that tone. It's not a judgment space, it's just an interesting thing to question things that
Yes.
we
Yeah.
never really have before. So, if you are feeling sober curious or exploring your relationship with substance, I have created a special PDF to help guide you through that journey. So, if you're questioning your relationship with substance and want to know more support on maybe trying out a dry January or what it means to be sober curious, go ahead and click the link in the show notes to download the PDF for some extra support. Also, I know that January has already started, so if you are interested in a dry January or being sober curious, know that it's never too late to start. You can try a damp January. That would be a very sober curious thing. Or you could even start your dry January today. So just some ideas, and don't hesitate to download the PDF. There's a link in the show notes for extra sober curious support. During the pandemic, started to drink less. And I similarly felt like I never loved drinking. I think the most fun I had with it was in high school and college. I liked it less. In adult life, I liked it less. And during the pandemic, I really noticed that I was feeling really anxious, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think that helped. And something I've noticed is from people sharing is a thread of how alcohol is impacting mental health and how other substances impact it as well. So I
Right.
personally noticed feeling more anxious and disconnected from my body. Um, sometimes during the drinking, but most often after, like a day after, just feeling off, even not hungover, but
Right.
just like not connecting with myself the way I wanted to. Whereas there are other substances I use that I don't have that experience that will help with those things and enhance that connection.
Right. Right.
Have you had any experience with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, especially as I got older, probably from when I hit about, it was probably happening before I hit 40, but definitely in my 40s. I think that, well, the more I questioned internally, even if I didn't share it with anyone, because you know what it's like. I felt like if I told my husband at the time or my family that I was questioning my drinking, then they would all be watching me with an eagle
Mm-hmm.
eye, like, okay, yeah, you probably shouldn't have another one. And I definitely didn't want to be in that situation. Mainly because I just didn't want to be told, that I was wrong. But I was definitely questioning it internally. And then what would happen is I would over imbibe, and then I would wake up the next day and I would feel so angry with myself, and the
Mm.
absolute anxiety that came with it. And now people call it anxiety, right? So, I would feel so anxious about it and so uncomfortable and so mad at myself. And I'd be my own worst, nobody else had to tell me that I'd had too much, because I was already beating myself up about it. And then, but then, of course, to get rid of that anxiety, you know, that evening or the following evening, a drink would temporarily get rid of the anxiety. And then you're
Mm.
just in this constant, 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 catch-22 situation. So you're just going round and round and round in circles, and then it becomes almost debilitating because I would be so upset with myself all the time. That's not conducive to me or my family or anyone else. So
I want to add in another quick tip that has been helpful for me over the last year is that instead of asking how or if this substance is harming you, ask yourself, how is this substance benefiting you? And let that dictate the decisions you make. I'm going to share a clip that touched a lot on what you said about this cycle of I think, again, it's different from everyone. There's a wide range that I heard from where some people, when they drank, felt a little better. And then the next day felt not as good. Some people, it was when they drank, they would feel more out of control from their bodies and more disconnected and more anxious. But I think a lot of the after effects was a theme. So I'm going to share 2 quick clips.
I've been starting to be more interested, or I guess sober curious, about taking a break from alcohol to see how that really affects my physical body and my mental health. I notice I tend to spiral down the next day after I've been drinking, having more feelings of anxiety and just not feeling comfortable in my body. It's kind of a hard thing to stop because that's not the sensations I feel while I'm drinking. Not that I've really ever been someone that drinks to excess often, but it's just hard to balance the two because you might feel more relaxed the night that you're drinking, but the next day is just too much anxiety and not feeling really safe in your body.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds really similar to what you shared about kind of this cycle we toggle between. It's helping me and I feel relaxed right now and I kind of need this right now, but then the flip side of now I feel worse, and then the cycle continues.
Exactly. Yeah there's such a correlation between alcohol and mental health, and you don't have to be drinking to excess. Like she said, she doesn't. It can be 1 drink, it can be 2 drinks. It's still going to have that effect the next one in your sleep, obviously, because the body wants more alcohol to get you up, and you're sleeping and you're going to wake up, and of course you've got the thirst, and you'll wake up anxious at probably 3 a.m, and then so then you try and go back to sleep, and then that anxiety is there twofold when you actually finally do get up, and then it stays with you pretty much for the rest of the day, and it's that it's a battle, and it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, during pandemic, when I was already knew I was anxious, I was okay, maybe I'm gonna just chill out, not do that as much for my mental health. There was a wave during the pandemic where I certainly did, because I feel like that's what the pandemic could bring out as well. But as I've gradually since then started drinking less and less, I'm much more able to attune to my body and how it's feeling the next day. So I think the last 2 times I had a drink, one was my husband and I were at a really fun fancy dinner, and I got a fun cocktail and had a great time. It was lovely. The next day, I had 1 drink. The next day I felt off. I was just so I kind of noted that and was okay, maybe the next time we're out to dinner at a fun dinner, I just don't, because I don't really feel good today. And then the most recent time I was visiting old friends from Nashville, where I used to live, and people I love so dearly, and we were having nachos and margaritas, and I was I haven't seen these people in forever. It'll be fun to just have a drink, and be together. So I have a drink, and I felt, fun and goofy and like myself for probably 15 minutes. And then after that, I started to feel disconnected from myself, from my body, from the people I was with and I was really bummed out because I was like, man, like I didn't even finish my drink and I like was so excited to be here with you and now I feel pulled away from you. So like kind of
Right.
noting that. And I think for me, these are things that were probably always happening when I would have a drink. But again, I was so used to it that, I didn't have the
Right.
ability to discern the difference because I didn't have an equilibrium within my body.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, and that's exactly, and I think that's when you start having that sober curious kind of feel, you start paying attention to those things. And yeah, they were probably there all the time, but we were just used to it or you ignore it. But then the more you cut it out, I feel like you're so much more aware when you do go back. And that's what was happening. Every time I went back and just had a drink or something, it would feel, yeah, I would feel just not in a good space at all. And I was so much more aware of it.
After Jody and I had this conversation, I realized that what we were talking about here is called ABA experimentation. And that's when you try a behavior, then you take it away, and then you try it again. And when you do that, you can notice the difference of how you feel before and after. And honestly, I have been using that as I explore my relationship with substance, and it has been really impactful for me and is one of the primary reasons, probably the primary reason, that I don't really drink anymore.
And when we're kids, before alcohol ever comes into our lives, we know how to deal with, things at school or, situations because we have no other way, and so we just deal with it. But then we have, alcohol comes into people's lives and then they deal with it with alcohol. So then we forget and we don't know how to sit with feelings, which is why then people pick up a drink because they just don't know how to be and want a quick fix from feeling sad or feeling, some for me, I get a lot of nervous energy. When things are going right too, and I don't quite know what to do with myself. And that's when I would be like, oh my God, let's buy a bottle of wine, let's have drinks, And now, it is uncomfortable sometimes, but I did it a long time ago, so I know I can do it again. It's just it's cutting out the alcohol is kind of the first part a lot of the time, and then it's kind of getting used to having to figure out those other feelings that we've ignored for a long time.
Yeah, I had never thought about that. Like as children, you're exactly right. We do know how to deal with these big emotions. It's not expected that there's like a substance to
Right.
use to help you. It's like, no, you learn how to work through it. And as we're adults, we get farther and farther away from that. It becomes more and more the norm and more the okay to like having a hard time dealing with this. Try that.
Oh, it's the first thing people will say, oh, you've had a rough day, pour yourself a stiff one tonight, or whatever, it's the first thing. Oh my God, you've got, you've been promoted. Let's crack out the champagne. It's so integrated with everything that we do. So taking it away, you do have to sort of go, all right, what's my treat now? What's my, yeah. So it takes a minute for sure.
Yeah. And I really hear what you're saying too about like how we're dealing with things and as a treat, like whether it's a good day, a hard day, it's nice to have something, some sort of like ritual to support you through that, right? And that ritual could be a wide range of things, but it's often alcohol. So, sidebar here, if you are sober curious and you find that you're craving this end of the day ritual, I recommend replacing that substance with something else. So for me over the last year, I have really enjoyed having sparkling water at the end of the day. You can even add some bitters or some citrus to make it feel fun, even some herbs in there. Adrenal cocktails and mocktails are a great replacement as well. And also tea. I always love having tea at the end of the day. So instead of focusing on taking away, think about adding in something new that's going to support you. So in this next clip, you're going to hear from a community member who shares about how substance support has been a part of their emotional processing of things. I also want to note that this next clip references sexual assault, so if conversations about that are triggering for you, go ahead and skip this next part, and you can look in the show notes for where to begin again.
And there were times when I did feel like out of control, unsafe with my body, and I felt like having alcohol led to an increase in that sense of just like fear, especially being a woman, of like being out of control in your body. I've had experiences with just like sexual assault that had to do around drinking. The worst one, I actually was not drinking, but the other person was, and that, left a deep trauma. But yeah, alcohol was a part of my life, especially as a late teen and early college, and then marijuana kind of joined the show. My relationships changed. Yeah, early on it was definitely like doing it because other people were doing it and trying it and feeling a little sense of, connection increased, and also connection with my body felt better. After my big trauma, my sexual assault, I leaned on cannabis as kind of like a numbing and support for getting me through like a time of deep depression and anxiety and panic attacks. And it was certainly a crutch and like a Band-Aid, but I was grateful for it and sort of created a relationship with that substance. And I certainly view cannabis and psilocybin as medicine when used in the right way, but I think I was definitely using in a not super healthy way. It was like, okay, I feel too many emotions and I don't know how to navigate this, so I need cannabis. Once I had a lot more support with my mental health, I created more of a relationship with cannabis where it was like, okay, I just, do this when I feel like I want to for certain reasons. Yeah, utilizing it in an intentional way instead of like a numbing.
I really love leaning into the questions here of what is your intention for using a substance in any given moment, and noticing how it makes you feel, if it pulls you into the body or pulls you away from it. And also really sitting with, when are we using substances to process big trauma and emotions, and how we can cultivate other tools to navigate these big emotions without substance support. We've also pretty much only been talking about alcohol to this point, but a lot of community members also shared about the roles of cannabis and psilocybin in their mental health, and as well as a substance that people are using. What is your relationship, I guess, with other substances been like?
The only other substance would be cannabis, and
Yeah.
I don't. Well, so I have no issue with that. I guess for me, everything that has gone wrong in my life has had to do with alcohol. Everything that I feel, I've put myself, as she mentioned, I've put myself in situations that could have gone horribly wrong. And that was always due to alcohol. And I started as in my late 40s, especially started blacking out a lot. So friends and people, I was perfectly coherent, and people couldn't tell, and people very close to me could, but other people couldn't tell that I was in a blackout state and would have no recollection. So for me, I never had, I smoked, used cannabis in England. We used to do hash as well when I was, 15, 16, 17. But it was never an issue. It wasn't something that I, had to have. It was fun on occasion. fast forward to now, I will still do that on occasion. The difference being for me is that it's when I'm just chilling out. I want to just stay home, watch TV. I want to relax. It helps with any, anxiety. It makes me feel, it gives me a little bit of something. If I want to switch off, extremely busy, pretty stressful jobs, and it gives me that little bit of switch off. The biggest difference is I'm not getting in my car. I'm not making random phone calls. I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm not embarrassing anyone around me. So for me, I enjoy that as an alternative. I have drinks that have that in it. And that's a lot of the time, that's my evening drink. I have one, and it's, has some cannabis in it, and it's perfect. So that's never been an issue. Has it become a little bit of a replacement? Perhaps. But it's not something I feel like I need to do all the time, or, day in and day out and every night. So I think when it comes to substance abuse, it all depends on, there will be people that will say to me, and people in the community, different communities I'm in, that feel very strongly that if you say you're sober, that means you don't participate in any mind-altering substances. For me, I would 100% say I'm sober, because I don't drink alcohol. So the other doesn't even come into play for me, because it's never been an issue. It's never caused me any problems or caused any harm to me or anyone around me. So that's how I view it. So of course we've got the California sober term, and a lot of people that quit drinking end up doing that. And I think so much of it is also depends on what happens. People that are in sobriety, for many reasons, it may stay away from both, or if they've used other substances. So I think it's such an individual thing, and I don't think anyone can label or say this is right, this is wrong. You're full of crap because you say you're sober, but you still will partake in having cannabis. I just, everyone's entitled to their opinion. For me, it's not a substance that I abuse, but it is something that I will do.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I actually had a pretty big trauma around cannabis at a young age. When I was in high school, I was dating someone who used cannabis to really self-medicate a lot. They were bipolar, and it was a support for them, but to an unhealthy extent. And when they weren't able to, I guess, stabilize through that, they turned to harder drugs, and it evolved into a heroin addiction. And at that time, I'm 16. I never touched any of it. But my first experiences with cannabis were these really negative ones. And then that paired with society telling you so much. At least I knew my parents would have a drink here and there. But it was clear, if we ever caught you, if we caught you drinking, we kind of expect that. If we caught you smoking, you'd get in really big trouble. So in my head,
right.
Cannabis was this horrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then especially with my experience around it, that met what I had heard. My relationship with it evolved. I started to dabble and get more okay with it throughout my life, but I definitely had boundaries of fear of I couldn't be in a relationship with someone who used it because there was so much trauma there. Turns out I married someone who used it regularly and forced me to deal with a lot of that. And it was so much discomfort for me because I was like, the fact that you do this brings up so many triggers and trauma for me. But it was a gift to have to work through it. And I got to experience forming my own relationship with cannabis. And at first there was a lot of anxiety because it was related to these past things. And now I feel like I know how to regulate just the right amount to feel way less anxious, way more connected in my body and people around me. I even think able to just see things from a wider perspective in a
Yes.
really,
Yeah.
just in a gentle, eye-opening way that, quite honestly, I think like impacts the way I engage with the world in a quite positive way. But then on the other hand, I do have friends who like use cannabis regularly and still kind of are like, maybe it airs that same quiet dependency that alcohol might for a lot of people. So I think it's like a wide range of things, but it's such a curious one to explore because again, like alcohol is the norm and okay to use, and then cannabis socially is now it's becoming less and less stigmatized. But there can be a lot more benefits. And I think I personally see it as like, as the other person shared, like an earth medicine, that if we use it with intention, there can be really great benefits. If we use it as a dependency, there's another relationship. But I think I see substance as like it's an ongoing relationship and conversation that you're having that for me and from a lot of experience that I've heard adjust a lot throughout your life. I want to take a moment to note another sidebar here, which is that a lot of our stigma around cannabis comes from the war on drugs. If this is something that you are curious about, go back and listen to episode 83 about the history of psychedelics with Liz Bowden, and we dive deep into the stories we've been told about different substances over time. And we're also going to continue to dive deeper into this conversation about the relationships community members have with substances other than alcohol throughout more of our Sober Curious conversations this month. So stay tuned and keep listening in the upcoming weeks.
Yes. Yeah. I think things change, opinions change on things. And as we grow, we find that some things work better than others. I do think that, people will say, well, it's a gateway drug. People are going to go on to use something else. I'm sure there are people that do that. Absolutely. I mean, I know there are. I think if any time whatever you're using, if you get really worked up because you don't have any, then it's become more of a dependency than you chose it to be. But I also think that it's I've got some police friends and they'll say, we'd much rather people are using that. Nobody's ever called to break up rarely ever called to break up a domestic situation because they both got high. Very different to two people getting drunk. They're not people on going out and causing, issues in bars and stuff because they're a little high. I mean, it's just a totally different thing. And I don't know. I feel like it's in so many ways it's good for you as well. So, I have no issues with it.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, I feel like this is a conversation I'm going to continue to dive into, but I cannot thank you enough for sharing your time and your honesty and vulnerability and insight with us today and just being a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to be here.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
How can people support you in the shop? Do you want to share a bit about Point 5?
Yes, Point 5 is down on Kerry Street in Richmond, and it's we've got about 150 products. We do have a bunch of things that do have adaptogens and nootropics, and a few other things, some kava drinks. But yeah, anyone that's maybe sober curious or even just being more mindful about their drinking, we can certainly help give alternatives, maybe Sunday through Wednesday or Sunday through Thursday. You don't want to drink too much, but you still want that particular, get home and have a nice drink. You can make it, but just make it 0 proof. And people can find us at 0.5 RVA or 0.5RVA.com. And any questions people have, they can just reach out. I'm an open book, and I'll share things and help to give people some advice if they want it.
All right, people, come back next week to dive deeper into more sober, curious community conversations. And we're going to dive deeper as we explore our relationships with cannabis and psilocybin and further dive into the question of what is a substance. If you haven't already, you should definitely join the Dream Team. So the Dream Team is a group of incredible people who support the operating costs of this podcast every month. And you can join for as little as $3 a month and give the gift of this podcast to the community. So all you have to do to join is click the link in the show notes. And if you aren't able to support financially at this time, you can still make a big impact by sharing your favorite episode with a friend.